Good afternoon and welcome to the LFS podcast this afternoon for the Euro special. The last of the group games get underway this evening between Group E and Group F. Here this evening we'll have both groups live for you later on. 5 o'clock for Group E and 8 o'clock for Group F. So far there's been a lot of talk about who's been the impressive teams and who haven't been that impressive. So far it's all the analysis about England and where they've been going wrong. That's what we'll talk about this afternoon. We'll also talk about France, what they're the favourites going into the tournament but not performing to the level they should be. Spain are the big impressive team so far, alongside Germany the host, but do the hosts always do well, and is that enough to get you to win the competition? We'll also talk about the teams that were a bit of a shock to impress, the likes of Austria and Slovenia, who've impressed as well. Switzerland and Portugal, very impressive, and we'll talk about who needs improvement if they're going to want to go deep into the competition. So, let's start with the teams basically that are the headliners for the Euros so far, and one of them coming into the tournament was England. Last time round's runners-up, lost to Italy in the final at Wembley, and are one of the highest ranked teams in the world at the moment. Whether those FIFA rankings are correct, Belgium would be the big target for that one that people are still uncertain about as to why they are there. But we'll start with England because they're the big headline. That's the title of the podcast. What is going wrong with England? All the talk over the last 3 games about what's been going wrong with England, everybody's had their say, everybody's had their opinions, and I've wrote some things down before this on what I think is going wrong with England, because ultimately you have to weigh in. If you can't beat them, join them, as they say. And ultimately England, I went on a rant last night when I was watching the game with Slovenia, and although not being an England fan, being a neutral and watching on, you can see what's going wrong. Maybe sometimes that when the analysis is happening on TV and on the broadcast, it's kind of that, it's the emotions that are getting through. But if you take the emotion out of it, basically what's going wrong with England are they're slow in possession, they're lethargic on the ball, and at times they've no vision for a forward pass. When they're playing about the defence, there's no kind of vision of this is our next pass and this is how we're going to get our shot or we're going to attack. There's no real consistent vision in the team of what they actually want to do. I mean, they had an unchanged side for the first 2 games. Serbia, a lot of people have said the first 30 minutes against Serbia was a good performance. They started well against Serbia, got their goal from Jude Bellingham, and it looked pretty comfortable to start off. They dripped away in the second half. They, again, similar to what Denmark did against Slovenia on match day 1, strong first half, poor second half. England were exactly the same against Serbia. They had a very good first half, kind of fell away in the second half, lost energy, lost vision, lost that kind of emotion in the game to get forward, to push forward. And a lot of that in the first game was brought down to maybe Trent Alexander-Arnold, the experiment in midfield that Gareth Southgate called it. The experiment in midfield of Trent Alexander-Arnold playing there when he's a traditional right back, put him in there alongside Declan Rice and see how that will work, because a lot of people have called for it. We've seen it with his club at Liverpool during the season, that he was decent in that position and could have been a future position for him. But a lot of that in the first and second games when England didn't perform well was down to him, as the media called it and the analysis called it. A lot of people said was the case, was he was used as kind of a scapegoat for that situation. As I was saying, England using Trent Alexander-Arnold as kind of a scapegoat in midfield of that experiment is the reason England aren't playing well. He's the reason that England aren't doing playing the football they want to play. But Conor Gallagher came into the team last night. The only change from Gareth Southgate's team between from the first 2 games to last night, and he played a further forward role. He was a bit more advanced in midfield. He didn't sit as deep as maybe Declan Rice was, but at the same time, he didn't have major involvement in terms of actually changing the way England played in midfield. There wasn't actual much kind of distinction between him and Trent Alexander-Arnold in their impact. The ultimate difference was on the ball. Out of possession, I couldn't see very much difference between Conor Gallagher and Trent Alexander-Arnold. On the ball, very big difference. Conor Gallagher isn't that type of player. He isn't a player that's going to sit a bit deeper and play those long passes for runners in behind. That's exactly what Trent Alexander-Arnold does. Conor Gallagher is a more get on the ball, more physical midfielder, playing in between the lines. That's not what England needed last night. We've seen it with Slovenia sitting a bit deeper. They needed someone a bit deeper who can play those passes for the runners in behind. They didn't have that for the majority of the game. I go back to the point about Trent Alexander-Arnold on the ball. He created 3 key passes in 57 minutes. 3 key chances in 57 minutes against Denmark. Was substituted for Conor Gallagher, who ultimately came on and made it more of a physical battle in midfield, which changed the game completely. Made it a bit more difficult for England to find any of those passes. Then Gareth Southgate decided that he's going to bring on fresh players that will make runs in behind, with the likes of Eze, Bowen and Watkins. Runners in behind. Why would you take off your player that's going to play those passes to bring further runners on for a player that's more physical in midfield, and then wonder why you don't get those balls played into those runners for them to get shots off? It seems pretty basic, but we had that talk, and I went through that last night and a bit more in a bit more detail when I was talking about the game. One thing I would say to that point, Conor Gallagher came off at half time last night against Slovenia. So Gareth Southgate clearly knew after 45 minutes that the decision to put Conor Gallagher in midfield was not the right decision. Wasn't the right idea, wasn't the right vision, just wasn't the right decision to make in midfield for England at that time. He brought Kobbie Mainoo on, the Manchester United midfielder, 19-year-old, only turned 19 back in April, and had a wonderful season for Manchester United. Probably had the game of his career in that FA Cup final against Man City, but it was an impressive cameo. He came on and looked decent in midfield. He was getting on the ball more. He was actually impacting the game a lot better than Conor Gallagher was in a similar position, playing more, yes, further forward, more centrally than Gallagher was. Gallagher was more towards the right-hand side. Mainoo played more centrally in that kind of 10 role, which confused me a bit as to why you would bring him on and put him in that position. But ultimately, it's not the player's fault, is the point. It wasn't the player's fault that the system wasn't working. Mainoo played well. Gallagher did his job in that first half. Clearly it wasn't what the system needed. Trent Alexander-Arnold made some good passes. The common denominator on all 3 players coming on, the system didn't work to their strengths, to the team's strengths. And Gareth Southgate chopping and changing, making those changes throughout the game, they didn't work in tandem. You bring off your best passer of the ball and bring on loads of runners. Makes no sense. For a more physical midfielder who isn't going to play those passes for the runners. Then brought Kobbie Mainoo on to play in a more advanced role, in a 10 role, when you've got Jude Bellingham, who started in that 10 role. You've got Phil Foden, who can also play in that 10 role, both on the pitch. So what's the point in bringing Kobbie Mainoo on to play in that position? Not the player's fault. Played a decent game. Didn't do too bad in that midfield. Not a bad outcome. But, again, the system didn't work to their strengths. All 3 players came on to try and do a job, but all 3 couldn't flourish in the way they wanted to because of the system wasn't working to their strengths. I go back to the Jude Bellingham point. Jude Bellingham has been on the pitch for the vast majority of all the games. He's been very heavily involved, playing initially in an advanced midfielder role, behind Harry Kane in the central areas, trying to create. He hasn't looked as good in the last 2 games, in the Denmark game and the Slovenia game. He looked pretty decent. He got the goal in the Serbia game and looked very kind of mobile in that area. But it kind of faded over the 2 games. And ultimately, it's not the fact that in a 10 role he's not performing is the fact that he's not consistently in one role. He's chopping and changing different roles. He's very, very free in that area, which at the minute I don't think is what England needs. Yes, they need that creative spark and they need that ability to move with the ball and adapt to certain positions. But I watched it. Jude Bellingham has played left wing. He's been wide on that on that left-hand side, swapping with Phil Foden in that role quite often. He has played the central cam role, the 10 role. He's dropped into central midfield, and then he's been defensive midfielder as well, picking the ball up from the centre-backs. So a combination of all those different positions and all those different roles is making it even more confusing in that midfield, in those positions and in those moments where England are wanting to get on the ball, wanting to get forward. You need to have someone who's pinning the defence back. One, Harry Kane, then Jude Bellingham behind to press, to keep that push on, and leave it to your further defensive midfielders, the likes of a Declan Rice, or a Conor Gallagher, or a Caoimhan, or even Trent Alexander-Arnold in the first game, to get on the ball, to push forward, and to play those passes. That's what you need. But Jude Bellingham has been swapping and swapping in different roles, which makes it even more difficult. And I'm not saying it's the player's fault. This time, it comes down to the system. He needs to be told that stick in that one role. Stay in that role. Central midfield. Stay in an attacking midfield position to help Harry Kane up front. He has to stay forward as well to help out with that. I'll come to that in a moment. The wide players can get on the ball and find those passes into you if they need to cut it back from the byline or go for the early crosses for you to make a run in. Simply exactly like how they played against Serbia. Ball down the right hand side. Saka lifts it in to the box from the byline, and Jude Bellingham's there to head it in. Late runs into the box. Not seen very, very much of that at all in the last two games. So, clearly there is a problem there as well. Then we go to the fullbacks. They're playing a naturally right-footed right fullback at left back in Kieran Trippier, and Kyle Walker right back. Kieran Trippier played a bit better last night, but there's clearly only one thing he can do. If he goes down the left-hand side, the only thing he can do is cut inside. He can't go wide on the overlap, because he's got... I mean, it's not that he has no left foot, but he's got a really strong right foot. So, if he goes down the left-hand side, down the flank, to try and find Phil Foden, he can't whip it in with his left. He has to come inside, so that makes it easier for the opposition to cover over and defend. Ultimately, on that front, going backwards, he has to turn back on himself and finds himself in a difficult position to defend those situations. Ultimately, he does have the right foot that he can pass it across the field, but from a natural left-hand side, it's not, again, causing that imbalance, causing that problem where they don't have the threat down the left flank because your left fullback is not naturally in that position and can't play to the strengths of that position. Again, a mismatch on the field. I'm not saying that that's ultimately the main cause of England's problems, but it is another factor to what is going wrong with England and not getting forward and not getting into those right spaces and not getting the strengths out of the team on the left-hand side of the pitch. I heard something from an article that one of the journalists wrote, and it wrote a really kind of poetic paragraph without the letter A in his paragraph, and he said it's like what England are trying to do on the field. He used it as a metaphor for England on the field. He said they're using 70% of the pitch, England, mostly down the right and the central left-hand side struggling. It's like you writing a paragraph without using the letter A. You're hamstringing yourself. You're making it difficult for yourself to actually be balanced on the field. It's very weighted to the right-hand side. And I made a point last night, and I think I got myself in a bit of a muddle last night because I said how England's balance was right in moments, but more often than not last night it was more the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. It was the right-hand side that were struggling more last night than the left-hand side. Now, I said that was making it more imbalanced, but the point that I was making was England, initially in the first game, and the parts of the Denmark game mostly, they were very right-focused. Walker, Saka, down that right-hand side. That was where they were getting their joy. That was where they were getting their attacks. That's where they looked the most confident. Ultimately, that's where both of England's goals have come from in the group, down the right-hand side. Last night, Slovenia had that covered over. They were double marking Saka, closing spaces down, well defended. But it comes back to this imbalance point. England only then had space down the left-hand side, and that's where they struggled. Phil Foden did get on the ball more, Kieran Trippier did get on the ball more, but it goes back to that imbalance point. They couldn't get the best out of those players in those positions because of the imbalance. The opposition knew that, and knew that England's attack mainly was coming down the right, so Slovenia covered that over. That's why England didn't score last night. They didn't create major chances, because Saka was kind of marked out of the game for the majority of it. Kyle Walker couldn't find those passes down the right-hand side because it was very, very well marked. And he didn't have the switch ball on because of the imbalance in the team. There wasn't a natural left-sided winger. Phil Foden doesn't want to play there. He is not his best role. His best role is centre. So that's not a good idea. And then you've got a right-sided left-back. A player in left-back. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. A player in left-back who naturally plays right-back and is right-footed. So there's the imbalance. So we go back to that point of imbalance. Moving on to Harry Kane. Now this is another big point for England. I've talked about the players in midfield, I've talked about the fullbacks, and I've talked about how the imbalance in the side. But Harry Kane is also not helping to this situation. I get when he played at Tottenham that he came deeper, he played those passes in behind, he helped Son and other players and distributed really well from a deeper role, from a deeper 9 role in terms of like a false 9, or coming very deep into the midfield to help out with the attacks. I get that from what he played at Tottenham. Last season at Bayern Munich, his biggest involvement in the game, which it should be for a number 9, is putting the ball in the back of the net. He was an out-and-out number 9 for Bayern Munich. I mentioned the stats last night, something over 50 goal contributions between the Bundesliga and the Champions League for Bayern last season. Vast majority of them goals because he's in the right place at the right time to finish off in the 18-yard box. Harry Kane has been coming very deep, which is allowing the opposition to push up because they've got no focal point to pin the opposition back. You've got no target man to push the opponent back. So the opposition can step up. You're becoming more compacted in midfield. You're stepping on each other's toes because there's no room to play passes. There's no room for vision. There's no room for long range efforts to get yourself up the pitch. So you're closing yourself into those little smaller passes. Harry Kane needs to make those runs. If he's not going to make those runs, then you have to get him out of the team. I get he's the captain, I get he's an incredible player, but if he's not going to be in those positions and you're not going to get him in those roles in the 18-yard box, pinning the opposition defence back, then you're not going to get the best out of your team. Again, bringing to the point, Jude Bellingham not helping behind, but that same point, Bellingham has to push Kane up and Kane has to push the opposition back. They're all sitting too deep. They're not pushing high enough in the game. In the second half, Harry Kane was better. He was pushing higher. He was against Slovenia, in the second half, he was pushing higher. And they were getting bodies on the ball. But that was because there was a player there that was pinning him forward. I said it, Caoimhan coming on at half-time, playing more central, in a 10 role, pinning Harry Kane into that area, stopping him from coming too deep at times, to stopping him from dropping into midfield and playing midfielder passes. But it was because Jude Bellingham found himself out wide the majority of the time in that half space between the left wing and the centre and the 10 in the central attacking midfield, because Caoimhan was there and Phil Foden was there, so Bellingham found himself in the middle of a bit of a muddle. That's why I went back to the point of Mainu not being in that role, not the best decision. But ultimately, Mainu played a good performance because he kept Harry Kane pinned up as a number 9, as the focal point, as the furthest player forward for England to pin the opposition back. Now you could go back to the point that maybe Slovenia in the second half dropped off and played a bit deeper and weren't as willing to step up because they knew a draw was enough for them to go through. But again, it comes back to the point that it's not tactically inept. There was a reason for it, and it worked in in that second half than it did in the first half with Conor Gallagher. Because Caoimhan was in that role, pushing Harry Kane forward, keeping him in that area to get England up the pitch, which allowed the space for the wingers, which allowed for creativity. I thought coming on, Cole Palmer played well, Anthony Gordon with a little amount of game he played. I mean, he put Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back and put Walker at left back, which wasn't a bad idea. It was a nice idea. If Trent Alexander-Arnold is going to get into this team now, it would be right back playing an inverted midfielder rather than an out-and-out midfielder with another player at right back. That would be his only real major involvement in the game, I'm guessing, or in this team from now on. But one thing I will say about England, what was improved last night, their press was better and their energy was better than the first two games. But again, they were playing against Slovenia, 57th ranked in the world. Yes, they've been impressive, and I will come back to them being impressive. But still, once again, to the point that England weren't at their best. Nowhere near their best. They've got a lot to give, and if they want to go deep in this competition, they're still going to have to play better than what they did last night. They're going to have to work out this imbalance. They're going to have to get the right players on the pitch at the right time for the system they want to play. And they need to keep them in those positions. Allow them a bit of freedom. Of course you want your players to have freedom, but you also want them to know what roles they're playing. Bellingham, confused. Harry Kane coming deeper, not sticking to number 9. You have your a left back who's a right back with a right foot. There's a bit of miscommunication in midfield as to who's playing where and at what position and what time and what they need to do on the ball and whether that suits the system that England want to play. So all this communication, if they clean this up and get these little things sorted tactically, they can be a better side. We saw a glimpse in the last 15-20 minutes of that game, as I said, caveated with the fact that Slovenia maybe played a bit deeper, but at the same time England were getting on the ball, they were creating chances, and with pacey players in the final third, they were running at the defenders, they were chasing things down, and they looked a lot more filled with a lot more energy. That's a lot better. But still not good enough to the point. And ultimately they did finish top of the group, and they're through, and they're into the round of 16, where they will play at either the Netherlands or the third place team in Group E, which we will watch a little later on. Let's move on from England, because I've ranted about England for a long time and I need to move on. I wanted to get through all my points because I made quite a number of points, because there's a lot of points to make. To France, of course, the highest ranked European side in the world at the moment, ranked second in the world, only behind Argentina, the highest European side. And again, another team who were regarded as favourites, not quite playing to their level. They opened the tournament with a 1-0 win against Austria, but ultimately the overall play was good, and I'll get to that point in a moment. Then the second game, quite lacklustre up front against the Netherlands. Really didn't offer much in the final third. They struggled without Kylian Mbappe in that game, France. So that was a problem, a 0-0 draw there. And then last night, yesterday, the 1-1 draw with Poland, where they looked better in moments, more in the second half than the first, but still haven't scored with one of their players from open play. Their only goal from one of their players, Kylian Mbappe, was from a penalty. The goal from the Austria game was an own goal, but still not right at the moment. Still not quite there for France, and we know they can improve, and we know they've got incredible players, an incredible squad, an incredible manager, and everything is perfect for France at the moment in terms of everything that's set up for this tournament. Their performances on the field can improve massively. I think the Netherlands game was a kind of measure of where they are at this moment in time. I think the Netherlands played a good game against them. They did sit a bit deeper, and the Netherlands tried to hit them on the counter, which looked threatening at times. But France controlled that game ultimately in possession because the Netherlands allowed them to. I think France did look a bit lacklustre, a bit blunt in the final third against the Netherlands, but did look a lot better yesterday against Poland. I think the point about Austria, I will say that Didier Deschamps made some changes. He had Antoine Griezmann on the bench from the start, which I think was a mistake. against Poland yesterday. I think it didn't work. I think he tried to go for more of a 4-3-3 where Caoimhan, Conte and Rabiot in a midfield three. I don't think that worked. I think it was in moments too defensive, and at moments they committed too far forward. They weren't kind of, go back to the balance point about England, balanced enough in midfield. They weren't kind of, at one moment they were too far forward, and other moments they were too far back and disconnected. They weren't connected with both the defence and the attack at the same time. They were either disconnected with the defence, too far forward, or disconnected with the attack, too far deep. If they revert back to what they played against Austria, I think the way they played against Austria was very good. Austria were just very good defensively that night, but that's not a coincidence. It's the only game that France have won up to this point. It's the only game that they've looked really strong defensively, looked really strong in possession, and looked really strong out of possession ultimately against the decent Austrian side. Of course, beat the Netherlands. So I think reverting back to that Austria team where they had Griezmann in that role behind Mbappe. Mbappe off the left. They had Dembele on the right, and then they had who was it in midfield? I'm trying to remember. Do apologise. I'll get that up now. Yes. Marcus Thuram. Thuram played very well in that first game. He was swapping with Mbappe between left and centre, making those runs in behind. He played well against the Netherlands as well, but looked a bit hopeless without Mbappe in moments. Griezmann is their big creator. Let's be honest. Griezmann run the show in the last World Cup. He run the show in the World Cup in 2018, and in 2020 France struggled because Griezmann wasn't quite at his level, and Mbappe just didn't have the clinical edge in that tournament. But at 2022, they worked at the 2022 World Cup. They just lost it in the final, ultimately a disappointment. But the best of what France have offered in the last 3 tournaments have been Griezmann and Mbappe. He decided not to play Griezmann with Mbappe against Poland. In that first half, they looked okay, France. They were creating good chances towards the end of the first half. But again, it wasn't enough. I don't think it was good enough. I still thought that Poland were very comfortable in the game in that first half. But I think if they revert back to the way they played against Austria with that 4-2-3-1, the back four looked very strong. Conte and Rabiot sitting a bit deeper, allowing Griezmann to break forward. Then the wide players of Thuram on the left, Dembele off the right, and Mbappe through the middle, but Mbappe able to drop off to the left and swap with Thuram in moments. Looked very strong. They struggled with consistent chance creation, both against Poland and against the Netherlands, because they went away from that initial idea. One, because in the Netherlands game they didn't have Mbappe, and two, in the Poland game because they didn't have Griezmann for half of the match. So that was a problem in that turn. And even when they did get Griezmann on the pitch last night, they really just didn't look as strong in those areas. They didn't look like Griezmann was creating enough in those areas because he wasn't staying central. He was dropping off a bit deeper maybe at times. But again, struggling with consistent chance creation. But one thing I would give France, and I would give them props for, is their impressive defence. They've only conceded from a penalty so far. They've kept 2 clean sheets out of 3 and only conceded the 1 goal from a penalty, which ultimately was saved but had to be retaken. So they could have kept 3 clean sheets in the games. So they haven't looked kind of either out of possession or ultimately from open play vulnerable defensively. They've looked very strong, very compact, and very well drilled. The likes of Koundé, Teo Hernandez, Saliba and Upamecano. I think Saliba and Upamecano have been a very good partnership so far, and they've looked pretty comfortable with each other. They looked calm with each other. The press has been good for France. I think winning the ball back in high up areas has been impressive. Conte's been a big surprise in midfield for them. One thing I would say though is they need to cut out needless passes. In that game against Poland, in that first half especially, they tried to play themselves out of trouble by using skill and using little cheeky passes that ultimately got them in an even worse position. Keep it simple, keep it strong, and keep it kind of to your game to allow you to still improve and to still play forward and to get back to that idea of the Austria game, because I think that was the best we've seen France play. It wasn't the best that we can see from France, but it was a lot better than what we've seen against the Netherlands and ultimately against Poland yesterday. They were decent, but still struggling on that moment for consistent attacking play. Moving on to Spain, and I'll talk about. I could wax lyrical about Spain all day. I mean, they've been the most impressive team for me so far. They haven't conceded a goal. They've scored 5 goals, really good goals. They've got great quality up front. I mean, their cohesion between the young Nico Williams and the very young Lamine Yamal on either flank. The really strong play from Alvaro Morata, a really strong number 9. The midfielders in Ruiz and Rodri and Pedri. Very, very strong midfield. The defence looks so solid for Spain. They don't look like they're going to be penetrated whatsoever, with ultimately at times Laporte, sometimes Lenormand alongside in that defence. Dani Carvajal looked very strong. Marc Cucurella, the Chelsea players, look very strong. And the goalkeeper, of course, Unai Simon, who hasn't had very much to do so far because his defence have held him off very well. But ultimately, Spain have looked the most competent team, the most consistent team, and also the most the team that's playing like a team the most, if that makes sense. The team that gets it, that understands their system well, that are playing to their system really well, and are getting the best out of the players in their squad and in their team, and using their best qualities to their strengths to get them the ultimate best that they can in their team. And that's credit to Luis de la Fuente, the head coach, for getting that. But they had ultimately 20 shots against Italy, and the Italy game was the one that I wanted to target the most. I didn't watch them against Albania the other day. I had a close eye on it, but I wasn't analysing the game in real time. And the first game against Croatia, it was very kind of even between the two sides, but their clinical edge helped them. Ultimately, I think what we've seen the best of Spain was against Italy. Ultimately, an own goal was their only winner, and sometimes that happens in football. But they were the most impressive for me in that game against Italy, against a really good opposition, the current holders of the tournament. They made them look really naive and really haphazard defensively. They were creating chances at will. Their pace and the quality and ability in the final third was on fire. Absolutely incredible. They didn't give Italy very much to play for in the first half. I mean, they were absolutely sensational, Spain, in that first half. They created so many good chances, and their finishing ability. I said it in that game, in the commentary, I think they were hitting it too well. They were shooting too well. I mean, Donnarumma made some very good saves. I mean, 8 saves on the night. So ultimately, without Donnarumma, Italy really would have conceded more than just the one. But that's where I've been most impressed with Spain, against Italy, against a really good opposition. But they made them look second class. They made them look pretty average. And that's exactly what a team should be doing at this stage. Some may worry that they've picked too early, and that teams might figure them out and sort that out, and maybe they will struggle towards the end of the tournament. Maybe you don't want to hit your top form too early in a tournament, but I still think Spain have got a lot to go. And I still think Spain can get to another level. Although they've been fantastic, I do think they can still reach that level and improve it and still beat teams. So they've been the most impressive for me so far. Quickly on Germany, just before I round off the teams who have impressed me and ones that need improvement. Germany, they've been very impressive up front. I mean, Musiala's been their key player. Gundogan's looks strong. The captain, again, defensively, they look decent. They don't look too struggling. I mean, they've conceded an own goal, and then that really good goal from Switzerland in that game that ultimately were battling for top spot. They got that equaliser that gave them top spot in the end, Germany. So they've got that fight, that desire. Of course, they're the hosts. Of course, we'll talk about what the home crowd can do for them. But ultimately, basically off the team alone, they've been quite impressive from how they've played and the way they've played, and it's been interesting watching Julian Nagelsmann, a tactical masterclass against the 3 teams that he's played. Ultimately, probably should have got 3 wins out of 3. but in the end only got 2 wins and a draw. But still, I think a lot more to come from Germany, and they know their opponents for the round of 16. They will face Denmark in the round of 16, Germany, so I think they should be able to get past Denmark, but we will see. Other teams that have impressed me, and kind of surprisingly impressed me, Austria, topping Group B. They've been very impressive. They were very good against France, although not getting anything out of that game. They looked really strong against Poland. They beat them, and they were even more impressive against the Netherlands yesterday in that group game, where they destroyed them. They made the Netherlands look really bad. Their finishing was very good, and what Ralf Rangnick has done with Austria has been very impressive to get them top of the group, considering people were pipping them to go no higher than third because of Netherlands and France in that group. No one really gave them a chance of getting through in the top 2 positions, and where people had them pipped for maybe just getting one of the best thirds. But impressive from Austria, very good attacking. The defence could probably tweak a bit, but ultimately a side that isn't one of the top teams, that are probably on the easier side of the draw in terms of they've avoided the likes of France, Spain, Germany and Portugal on that front. So that will be a positive for them, that they can maybe get a bit deeper into the competition. They need to see who they play in the round of 16, and we'll see that after today. Slovenia, they've been very impressive. 3 draws out of 3, qualifying for the knockouts for the very first time in their history. Last night, very impressed with them against England and against Denmark, and should have beaten Serbia, barring that last-minute equaliser from Serbia. So ultimately, Slovenia have looked the most impressive out of the Group C teams. England haven't been their best, Denmark haven't been at their best, and Serbia weren't good enough. Slovenia probably deserved maybe higher than third, but that's what they will get, and they are through. Switzerland, they've been impressive. Not that it's been a massive surprise. They've got really good quality, but the way they've played in their games, the way they completely dispatched Hungary on match day 1, they looked decent against Scotland, a very hyped up Scotland side that needed a result. I mean, Switzerland were unlucky maybe in that game not to get more than a point, but they played for the point and they got that. And then they maybe slightly again unlucky to not get any more than a point out of Germany, but very impressive from Switzerland so far. Portugal have been very good in Group F. The one caveat to that I would say is that the 3 opponents they've had in Group F so far, they are yet to play Georgia, but the higher ranked in the likes of Czechia and Turkey haven't really been threatening at all. Czechia, they had to come from behind, and that was a good game, but Portugal, their quality showed out. Turkey, again, they made easy work of Turkey in match day 2, and we'll see how they perform against Georgia tonight. But I don't think that Portugal have been tested to that level yet, so we'll see how they perform in the round of 16 and in the latter stages. But they've been impressive with the way that they've played. The teams that need improvement, there are 5 teams on my list that need improvement. England, definitely. France, 100%. Italy, I feel a bit harsh doing this. Italy have gone through, it's tough being the holders. Everybody kind of sees you as one of the top teams. Obviously, with being the holders, you are going to be under more pressure. But I do think Italy have been okay. I don't think they've been fantastic. They got that last-minute equaliser to secure knockout football against Croatia match through, which showed a lot of energy, a lot of inspiration about them. But I do still think that Luciano Spalletti has a bit of work to do with them. They looked really haphazard against Spain. They looked really far off it, and they didn't look quite as good against Albania. Ultimately, they probably should have got more goals in that one, but Albania did well defending them to keep it close. So not as impressive from Italy. Maybe improvement needed, but again, that probably will come in the knockouts. The Netherlands have been actually probably one of the most disappointing teams so far in the way that they've played. They haven't won convincingly. They haven't played a convincing game. I think in the first game against Poland, they got that late winner from Wout Weghorst. Great initiative, fantastic, but ultimately still struggling with that final third ability. The game against France, both teams really struggled. Yes, hard done by the fact that they had that goal disallowed, and I'm not criticising them whatsoever. That was a poor decision, and I feel sorry for them on that front. But then yesterday's game, they had the chance to top the group, to really kind of put their name in there as one of the big sides to really show what they're worth. And an Austria side who a lot of people didn't predict, and ultimately Austria were very good, but to the equal point, Netherlands weren't as good as what they could be, very much off the level, and that's been a disappointment for the Netherlands. One other team I would say, although they're through and they're into the knockouts, is Denmark. I think we can see a lot more of them. I think they've got a lot of quality. I think they've got a lot of good players, and I think we can see a lot more of them in the knockouts. They're through. They're into the knockouts. We'll see how they play against Germany. That's going to be a very tough game. If they get past Germany and knock out the hosts, that will be a massive headline. But I think it's unlikely for Denmark. But they had the chance last night. If they beat Serbia, they could have topped the group and avoided that side of the draw and put England against Germany. That was a very realistic possibility. So ultimately they can only blame themselves for being in that position, having to face the hosts. But they do say if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. Germany, the hosts, maybe aren't the best, but are certainly one of the impressive teams that I have mentioned. Right, that is it. That is the LFS podcast, the Euros special. We've rounded up England, what's gone wrong with England at the moment. We've also talked about what France are doing wrong and what they need to return to, how impressive Spain have been, how equally impressive Germany have been in moments, Austria, Slovenia, Switzerland and Portugal, all those surprising-ish opponents that look really strong, and the teams that need improvement, England, France, Italy, Netherlands and Denmark. Right, we're back a bit later on. I will have two commentaries for you tonight. We will have Ukraine against Belgium in Group E, as Group E comes to an end in less than 2 hours' time. Kick-off at 5 o'clock in Group E, and then an 8 o'clock kick-off for Group F, as we'll be watching Georgia against Portugal at 8 o'clock tonight. But for now, thank you very much for tuning in. Do hit the like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and do comment your thoughts on this podcast. Greatly appreciated. We'll have another one after the round of 16, heading into the final latter stages of the tournament, and we will also have one before the final as well. So do not want to miss that. Thank you very much for joining us, and for me, Caoimhan Ferris, have a great afternoon. See you shortly.